Pornography is nothing more than just a distraction. It's not really getting you anywhere. It's getting in the way of your goals, your aspirations, and your purpose. It's perfectly normal to have arousal, have anything like that. It's not a bad thing. I mean, in those instances, I just tell them, like, look, listen, you may just have to just go for a walk, just move around. If anything, just distract your brain. It's not appropriate for you to be looking at a girl's butt or a girl's boobs or anything like that. Like, you're supposed to treat your fellow woman in Christ, your fellow sister in Christ with respect. You can't be over somebody's place late at night at around like 10 and then spending the night and then expect nothing to happen. Because, like, I've been there before, things happen. I used to be a part of a ministry called, like, Strong Enough. So, like, one of my responsibilities as a group leader is I was able to give my testimony. And I just told everything that happened in my life, being sexually abused, looking at porn, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, and all that other stuff. And I realized is that that's how you start the conversation.
You are welcome to Spot On with StephREDD.
How are you, StephREDD, today?
I am fantastic. In Spot On with StephREDD, we talk about different topics, just different issues.
There's a form of artist in everyone.
I love to be very independent.
And the recognition of the genius that we are and who we are.
I sound very smart, but I have zero education.
I always learn something from everybody I work with.
To see how we can raise new perspectives and, quite importantly, be able to progressively evolve with the fullness of who we are, the fullness of our genius.
When you are living a fulfilled life, that means that's the feedback loop that you are on the right path.
When you can give value to someone, that's your greatest gift to the world, and that's when people will listen to you.
And then begin to impact our world with that genius, one person at a time. Another episode of Spot On with StephREDD. I am StephREDD. Hey, buckle up for another really riveting episode. This particular conversation today is going to stir you in ways that you never thought it would. Now, today we have an incredible guest. Our incredible guest is Caleb Harris in the studio. Now, Caleb is a passionate recovery coach on a mission to dive deep into the conversations about God, navigating the challenges that Christian men face with deep-seated issues like pornography, and debunking misconceptions swirling around in the Christian world. Get ready to be enlightened and candid discussions that we're going to have that are bound to spark deep, real insights in you and hopefully transform your perspectives. Don't go away. Welcome, Caleb. Yay! I keep saying I'm going to get a bell so that when I'm welcoming my guests, I just ring it, ting. Hi, Caleb. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I am enthusiastic. I am fantastic. I am hopeful. I'm somewhat anxious because I don't know what part of the rabbit hole we're going to get deeply into today. But hey, we're going to go into it anyways. And I am sure you are up to the task, right? So just delve into it. So I would just start from the angle. Why recovery coach? What made you to consider that as an area of interest to becoming a recovery coach?
Yeah, so basically before I used to do recovery coaching, I used to work with kids with autism. So I was always dealing with behaviors and like problems and things like that. ABA behavior. Basically, you wanted to talk out the situation and just try to help out the kids, because like a lot of the kids, they just didn't really know what they were doing. A lot of them, suffer with communication skills. And then, before I knew it, I was like, wait a minute, I'm kind of just already doing my own kind of recovery coaching right now anyway, because I'm already dealing with behaviors, the patients that I talk to and the clients that I talk to. It goes kind of hand in hand, because many men struggle with addiction. They do suffer a lot with communication skills. They suffer with bad hurts, bad hangups, and just behaviors because, dad wasn't around or mom wasn't around, or usually just both. But it's just that what I've always seen is that lack of communication. I've always believed that I've always just had just a good deal for people who just struggle and have like disabilities or addictions or anything like that because I've had my own in the past as well. So yeah, I just said, I want to just make a difference in this world.
I love the angle that you're going. I mean, talking about how many times the absenteeism, will I call it, or the absence of parents, that's the word, affects particularly our male children a lot, particularly the absence of fathers. And I believe that's something I really like us to talk about today. But how particularly now did you begin to focus on that intersection between, I mean, using your recovery as a recovery coach, that intersection between faith, addictions, and misconceptions in the Christian community?
Yeah, so I mean, my family came from a lot of sexual addictions, to be honest, and I've seen it. Like, I come from a family of pastors. Like, my dad is a pastor, uncle's a pastor. Mom, before she passed away 2 years ago, she used to be a Sunday school teacher. She used to be a deacon. So I've seen all these things, and I've seen their bad hurts, their bad hangups. I've seen sexual assault going on, all these kind of things that we just never really talked about. It was always just pray and it'll go away.
Hush, hush.
Yeah, that hush hush. You just nailed it right on the head. Like, you don't really say anything about it. Just pray it all away and it won't go anywhere. And it's like, I'm younger. I'm 29. And I started realizing, well, I had a problem with pornography when I was 12. I quit two years ago.
Wow.
I used to be a very just sexually deviant young man, and I quit that 5 years ago. And I've been on my sobriety journey since like 2019. And it's just been an up and down cycle. And I would always like ask God, like, God, why is it that our people struggle so much with not just addiction, but with sexual addiction? And then I started realizing it's just like it's a lot of trauma involved. It's a lot of people just not wanting to have a candid conversation like we're having today. Because people find that, if you have a conversation about, hey, I'm a young man, I'm feeling aroused, and like, things are happening down there. I don't really know what's happening. And again, to what I said earlier, not having a father in your life, or not a lot of male role models. Like, you don't necessarily, as a young guy, want to explain this to a woman because then you don't want to make her feel uncomfortable. And then the church is possessed by like some kind of a demon, and it's like, I don't think they're possessed by a demon. I think that they want somebody to talk to.
Human. I once stumbled on an article, or was it a book, called "Talk to Your Kids About Sex," and there was a part of the different aspects of sex, right, of the sexual engagement, and then one of the chapters was pornography, and immediately after the topic, it's not whether your children would ever engage in pornography, it is how soon, and that just made it evident that, you know what, it's either you talk to them sooner or they will get to it sooner than you're able to talk to them.
Right.
And talking about sex, of which even in church, in our Christian circles or religious circles, it has never really been the kind of thing that you talk wholesomely about, such that there is this awareness to know what it is, to know what the parts of your body are, what they are called, what they are used for, and all of it, what is happening to you when you begin to get into that early puberty and your hormones are beginning to raise.
Right.
Someone to really talk to you so you understand it. So you now find out that many of us learned on the streets, or many of us learned from media, from either social media or from television, and could have now learned it in a perverse way than how it should have been. But I would like to ask you, how prevalent do you think this issue of pornography is? And let's talk about pornography. How prevalent do you think it is among Christian men? I mean, you talked about you said started at 12. How prevalent is it, and when does it typically start with them? Is it also as young as how you were? And what are the typical challenges, right, that you often face compared to, should we say, within Christendom and outside with the broader population? What exactly is the situation there?
Yes, I think the situation is that, again, just lack of education, but, just from like 10 through like 16 years old, around that age is like, male puberty starts to like hit more around like that 10 years of age, like a deeper voice, things are starting to find women attractive that you didn't really find attractive as much. And it all depends on every man's like hormones, and especially also just, every guy is always different, but around like 10 to 16 years of age is around that time where a lot of guys start to discover pornography. They start seeing a lot of films, a lot of movies, like like American Pie, and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and just all these like films out there that are just very like secular and just not really good for you or edifying for your soul in general. And then it just turns into a couple of sex scenes, and then now you're like in middle school or in high school, and now all of a sudden you're just no one's talking about it. No one's saying anything about it. There's not too many men in churches in general, so it's like you just kind of.
Mm.
What I say.
Oh, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. You said there are not many men in church. Now, what you doing, Caleb? There are not many men in church after all. There are more women in church.
Yeah.
And so the men do not have men in church
Uh-huh.
to talk with about these deep-seated things.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you, at 12, how did you find it? Did you go looking for it or did it come to you?
Well, I wasn't looking. I wasn't actually looking for it, to be honest. Like, I didn't know what a whole lot about porn was. I mean, I knew sex was out there. Like, there was like certain comedy shows that I would listen to on and off, but it was my dad. My dad had it lying around. He was a pastor at one time, and I just would see that. I'm like, well, my dad's a Christian, so this can't be that bad. I mean, he's got these tapes lying around, and I'm sitting down here, I'm looking at all these tapes, and I'm a young guy. I don't know any better, so of course I enjoy what I see. So.
And he never knew it, and he never knew that you probably had seen it. Are you the first male child or the only male child, or how many other male children are there?
So I'm the only child in my family. So I'm only like.
Oh.
So yeah. So my mom and my dad, they had like a 10-year split. My dad had me when he was like 23 or 24, and my mom was like 34, 35 at the time. So like an age gap there, and just a lot of I would always say that a lot of men honestly have to just figure a lot of things out by themselves, because a lot of us don't have these like conversations at all, and then when we fail, then we just beat ourselves up even more. But it's like, what was supposed to happen? Like, we've been trying to figure out things by ourselves. There's lack of leadership, and we're getting our leaders from like television shows and certain people on YouTube and things like that. And they're saying one thing or another. And it's just, I feel like a lot of men are just honestly very discombobulated and confused.
What do you think would be the most optimal way now to reach out to young men or even to growing boys? I like that you were able to attest to the challenge that between ages 10 and 16, initially for boys, the puberty age is where their bodies are changing, their voices are reaping. And, when my son turned 10, I went on a stroll with him. And I was just talking about what does it feel like to be 10? What are your anticipations as a 10-year-old? And then I asked, after he was done, I began to tell him, I said, hey, now you're getting on 10, puberty starts early with some. So let me tell you, your body is going to go through different things. And I told him how his voice probably reap. I said, however, some people it doesn't reap so much. So it could reap a lot. It could not reap, it may not reap so much. I mean, your dad has a baritone, but it's not so baritone. Sometimes when I wake up in the morning, because I have a deep range voice, my baritone can be more baritone than my husband's baritone. So I just said, you see, but at least there's baritone in the family. Just hope you get it from me, right? But I said, okay, your voice may rip, your shoulders will broaden, you have chest hair or not so much, because some people are not so hairy. You may have facial hair or not so much. You have bodily hair or not so much. And then I told him your penis will enlarge. And then he says, how large? And then I said, okay, since you asked, let me talk about it. So I said, I did the comparison to say, I used a family friend that he was conversant with. And I said, between this person and mommy, who has bigger breasts? And then so mommy does. I said, okay, just the same way women do not have the same breast sizes. It's the same way that men do not have the same penis sizes. So one day you would walk into the locker room and you would see a man whose penis may be bigger than yours, or another whose penis is smaller than yours. Do not for any reason believe or think that the person with bigger penis is superior to you, or the person with smaller penis is inferior to you. Everyone is created for a unique purpose, and you are amazing just the way you are. And very soon you begin to have wet dreams, and then you have pubic hair, and we talked about all that. So when he eventually got into higher school and they began to talk about puberty, he came home and tells me, everybody in class is doing, ew, teacher, don't talk about that. I'm like, okay. I said, what did you do? Say, well, you've told me about it before. So I was happy that he didn't feel so embarrassed because we had that conversation. So keep reminding that, hey, you're getting more handsome. And the girls will soon begin to come. I mean, like, no, mommy, don't talk about that. You better hear it now because your body is evolving and you're no longer the little kid. You're going to be a handsome dude and the girls are going to find you handsome, right? So just having those conversations. But sometimes I didn't have such conversations. And I recognize, just like you said, the communication breakdown with our boys, particularly from the fathers, if there's no reassuring leadership or role modeling in that aspect, not in business, we may have, oh, he's my role model or my coach in business or even in spiritual things. But what about sexual awareness and sexual recognition of, oh, this is how I'm feeling. I am burning. I am not married and I'm feeling all of this down there. What do I do? How do I channel this energy? Where do I not go to? And all of it. But then there is now this stigmatization of pornography, which I guess is this stigmatization where I say, oh, it's an addiction in itself. So we can talk about a drug addiction, an alcohol addiction, even a TV addiction, but it's quite shameful to talk about a pornography addiction.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think we can break away from there? How do you think we can begin to have such conversations in our not just in our religious squares, but in squares such that we can educate young men more, since we're talking about pornography amongst Christian men and amongst men generally? What would you suggest as a recovery coach to help navigate this path?
Well, honestly, I believe that, us as men need to just be more open and honest. Like, when I go on IG Live, I mean, I tell the guys, like, hey, this is my past, this is what I did. I mean, as a man who's 29 years old, like, I still have arousal, I still have wet dreams every now and then, and I still have those times where I'm just like, you know what, maybe I should just go back to my old life. It's because we're living with flesh and spirit. And I just reassure the guys, like, look, listen, God didn't, punish us for having sexual urges. Like, and that's what I think a lot of guys have been told. And I tell the young guys this too. Like, it's perfectly normal to have arousal, have anything like that. It's not a bad thing. Like, God is not punishing you. You're growing into your body. You're growing as a young man. Like, I mean, just to be honest, there may just be times where, you may just get hard for absolutely no reason at all.
No reason. Yeah, no reason at all. Maybe the wind just blew too hard.
Yeah.
There was just blew past too hard, and then, yeah. So what do they do? What do you typically tell them to do in such instances?
I mean, in those instances, I just tell them, like, look, listen, you may just have to just go for a walk or just move around. If anything, just distract your brain. Like,
yeah.
Up and it goes down. Telling young men this, older men this, it's like it'll just come and it'll go, right? Like, you can't control what happens down there. I mean, it is what it is. Oftentimes I've been told, and from my research and understanding, is that the healthier that you eat, you may just wake up in the morning hard. I mean, that's just what some guys, and low testosterone, not so much, but with certain guys who have very high T levels, they'll wake up aroused in the morning. It doesn't mean they have to do anything. They just get up, walk around, and it'll just go away. That's all.
That's a new level of awareness. So even as women, because I guess this is also an awareness where we should have as women, for those of us that are married or those of us that are intending to recognize that it is in the DNA of the man to be aroused even without provocation. So how do you now also, as a woman in his life, help him to manage and protect himself and protect his cistern, right, from soiling, so that he doesn't go around soiling his royal oats or engaging in such aspects of pornography, which eventually leads to some level of addiction that is not beneficial either to the brain or to the rest of the body. But in your opinion, what have you considered to be the greatest misconceptions about this kind of addiction in the Christian community?
I guess one of the misconceptions is, like, if somebody doesn't have their father in their life, then they're going to struggle with porn more. And that doesn't mean to be the case. Like, I talk to guys who've had their mother and their father in their life, still struggle with pornography. I've had clients who were overweight, in good shape, all that kind of stuff. Like, just guys who I look like Michael B. Jordan, Denzel Washington, like had like actor good looks, still struggle with
Yeah.
pornography and sexual immorality. Met guys who, not to be judgmental, but weren't very attractive looking, struggle with it too. So it's like those two things, like attractiveness and lack of fatherhood. A lot of guys think that, oh well, he'll struggle more in that department. And what I've seen is that most guys just struggle with this addiction because nobody tells them that it is an addiction.
Yeah, I like that you said nobody tells them that it's an addiction, but it actually is an addiction. Because there's a particular pastor that was preaching on social media, Pastor Femi Lazarus, and he talked about this thing where he's been talking a lot about this issue of pornography. And there was somebody in the comment section that said that when over 10 million people or so, that if a video drops on a particular porn site, he said or so, that it gets over 10 million views within an hour or something like that. So who's watching it? That means that there are a lot of people that are hooked on it. And we don't quite, so we talk about, yes, betting is an addiction for those that bet and could bet and sell their entire life earnings or savings because they're trying to bet on something, or like we said already, alcohol and drugs and, all of those. But then this awareness of pornography addiction, how do we even get them to realize that it's an addiction, and then get them to address the shame and the guilt that they may feel from this kind of addiction?
Well, in order to address an addiction, it's one of those like heart to heart kind of things, whether it's a young man or an older man. From my experience, it's
Yeah.
been a lot easier to talk to younger men than older men because older men get kind of stubborn in their own ways. Not all of them, but the ones that I've met. The younger ones, if I just tell them like, hey, look, listen, it's not appropriate for you to be looking at a girl's butt or a girl's boobs or anything like that. Like, you're supposed to treat for your fellow woman in Christ, your fellow sister in Christ with respect. You can talk to her, be nice to her, and if you guys want to, court or date, I mean, I would suggest running that by your parents, especially if you're like around 15, 16 years of age, or like if you're in your 20s and your 30s. And I truly do believe you had what you had together. You guys should court one another, do things the right way, seek a professional marriage counselor, a really wise spiritual advisor before getting married, and just stay abstinent until sex. It'll be hard to do, but at the end of the day, it's just one of those things where we do have God on our side, so it's not impossible. But since we haven't been taught a lot of these things, we're obviously gonna have to just set boundaries. Like, you can't be over somebody's place late at night at around like 10 and then spending the night and then expect nothing to happen. Because, like, I've been there before, things happen.
Things
Yeah,
happen,
things
yeah.
happen. You say, oh, it's not going
Oh, yeah, let's
to
not lie.
be
Yeah, we don't need to lie to ourselves. Yeah, yeah. So, I just remembered when my husband and I were planning to get married, and we're just about 4 months away from our wedding date. But then I was working in another country outside of Nigeria, and I was there for about 3 months before we eventually got married. And he came out for those 3 months. Was it 3 months? No, about 6 months. And for those 6 months that I was there, he never came visiting, and I used to get angry. Come and visit me. Come and see where I am. I mean, and then he said, when you are with me in Nigeria, there is caution that I need to wait till we get married, because I know there are a lot of people that know me and I have a reputation. Of course, I can't come to your house. Someone's going to query. You can't come stay over at my house. Someone's going to query. So we typically meet each other where other people see us. However, if I come to meet you in that country, nobody knows you there. Nobody knows me there. I can't guarantee you that something wouldn't happen. So in the better interest of preserving what we said we would do till the marriage date, allow me to stay back. Sorry if that's going to offend you, but when we finally get married, you'll be tired of seeing me. Right? I read because I kept saying nothing would happen. We have said nothing will happen. He said, maybe nothing will happen from your side, but I can't guarantee that I can hold myself. Right? And I guess that was a boundary. I really was offended, but then I realized, as a matter of fact, when in those moments, really, when there are no boundaries set, you really can't tell. You really can't tell. So to avoid a situation where, an airplane came all the way from the sky to hit a bicycle on the road, okay, it's better to just draw those lines. But what makes it now challenging probably. So it's now the level of awareness as well. Or how do we even begin to have these conversations? Like you said that it's difficult to have it with older men. Is it really because, so I am thinking that the older men may not be able to talk about it because they never had those conversations. They were never really exposed to having those conversations. So, there's some conversations that you feel vulnerable having. And if there's anything at all that I have come to know a little about male folk, you guys, you don't like to feel vulnerable.
Yeah, so weakness.
Because so vulnerability is tied to weakness, even though it's not. I feel vulnerability is humanity. It's just evident that you're human. But it's now just being able to connect with that deep self, of connect to a truth. However, that is something that has never been discussed. So it's exposing on the ends of, so instead of getting themselves to that, they shut it off.
Yeah.
And we think they are not. So we judge, and our parents folk, we judge them to say they don't share their emotions. They are just straight jackets. They don't connect with us. But the truth is, there are many of them that are dying inside, wishing they could actually get out that plug in their throat to talk.
Mm-hmm.
But because they never had those conversations with their parents, it was a taboo to have those conversations. And within the circle of interest, we're talking about the Christian community, it's the taboo. It's a hush hush. So even if someone does something bad, or someone molests you, or someone there's an issue that, oh, shush, don't put the Christian faith to shame, or don't put your family to shame. Do you know who we are? So it's because of how the level of awareness that they had, and also many of them were really hurting inside, but they could never share. Mm-hmm. So I just tend to, when you say speaking to older men, is it possible that you could also, or we could also begin to get them to come to the point where they can actually connect with that place and be able to share even from that place? I believe there's a whole lot of wisdom, a whole lot of insight and awareness that they can give if they begin to speak. But the thing now is, can they trust you, or can they trust us to speak to us from their place of vulnerability?
Yeah, again, it's one of those things where it's like it's an internal struggle within them. So like when a guy just has like problems opening up and being vulnerable, this is something that I did. I used to be a part of a ministry called like Strong Enough. So like one of my responsibilities as a group leader is I was able to give my testimony. And I just told everything that happened in my life, and, being sexually abused, looking at porn, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, and all that other stuff. And I realized is that that's how you start the conversation. You have to start the conversation be vulnerable first. When guys see that, and then other guys start becoming vulnerable, it's like some kind of chain reaction, and other guys start being vulnerable as well. But if like no one like steps up and has that conversation, ain't nobody gonna say nothing. 'Cause I know men very well, especially like that older generation. If no one goes out here and just says, "Look, listen, this is what happened in my life," we'll talk about sports, we'll talk about the game, all that other stuff. But if you talk about any kind of an addiction, if no one starts off that conversation first, then no one's gonna talk about it. So it all starts off with somebody just saying, "Hey, look, this is what happened." In order to get something, in order to get the ball rolling. So someone has to just step up and
someone has to bail the cat, even though we have to. So I say, okay, I throw myself under the bus first. Somebody has to throw themselves under the bus, and then the avalanche goes right tumbling down. In this, so in all of this, how do you help Christian men, which is presently your focal interest? How do you help Christian men navigate this? Navigate it with the integration of faith, right? How do you help them to navigate positively to probably a more wholesome space? Do you have testimonials of people that have actually gone through a process of recovery and have come out of it? What are the things that you typically do to help them go through the process of integrating faith, using faith, or however it is that you use to help them go through their recovery journey?
So basically, one of the things I always do is I have a support group for Facebook. So basically, I'm posting scripture every day. I'm checking in with the guys to see if they relapsed or didn't relapse. And it's a very private group chat, so no one can see it, so people feel vulnerable doing it. But with the actual like coaching, the three things I address is stress, boredom, and loneliness. Those are the three things that I believe so far from doing this coaching doing this coaching, those are the three things that a lot of guys suffer with a lot because there's like no purpose, no goals, and just listening to a bunch of other people who are just, talking and just running their mouth and not really saying anything. And I tell them, like, look, listen, this is what God is saying, and this is what the world is saying. God is saying you need to be pursuing a woman for marriage. The world is just saying sleep around. The more and more I talked about it is that when men feels that they can't sleep around a lot of women, they look at pornography. It's really just because men just want to feel as if they're in control of something. And when men don't feel that they're in control of something, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about they don't want to become vulnerable because when you're vulnerable, you lose a little bit of that control. So there's a lot of men who learn by the world that, if I can control women, if I can control everything around me, then I'm going to be safe. But that's neither the point. What I try to get through them is realizing is that God wants us to be vulnerable. I mean, even Jesus was vulnerable with Peter, James, and John. Like those are his three closest people, and also the disciples as well. So that's where like the faith aspect comes in. So it's like if Jesus can be vulnerable, I'm pretty sure you can be too. If Jesus wasn't doing everything by himself, I'm pretty sure you can't do everything by yourself as well. Because men have developed like this very lone wolf kind of mentality because of the lack of fatherhood, of the lack of men. They take it personal when like a guy is in their life or a couple guys are in their life and then they just go ghost on them. They take it really, really personal. And then back to the point of vulnerability, they don't really want to say anything because, I feel as if like I'm a punk or a coward or things like that. So what I learned with the coaching, it's a lot of mental, physical, and spiritual gymnastics that run around in the average guy's head. But most importantly, it comes from the three triggers of stress, boredom, and loneliness, which
Boredom
I
and
actually gave
loneliness.
them, get yourself in a community. There's people who do love you out there. These limited belief systems that they have where nobody cares about them, nobody loves them. It
Yeah.
all just comes from these isolated experiences. And I told them, like, they're just isolated experiences. They may happen again, they may not happen again. But at the end of the day, men, we do have to try.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I know we're talking in the context of the Christian faith,
Mhm.
but now also considering that we're actually supposed to take the gospel, the good news to the world, not just to keep within our Christian faith, had you ever find yourself in would I say in a tussle, trying to share your recovery journey or help someone realize the need for recovery, and then there is a conflict of beliefs where your integration of faith is clashing with the person's personal beliefs? How do you navigate to still help the person, whether the person is of a Christian faith or not?
Mhm.
Because so personally, I believe that we are supposed to take this good news to, we're supposed to be in the world, even though not of the world. We're supposed to be in the middle, in the heat. So when we see people in the heat that are doing this, how do you connect the integration of faith to help them get on the wagon of recovery and then follow through the process?
Yeah, so like for the most part, I do work with Christian men on this issue, but like with men who are of, they don't believe in God, I tell them like, look, listen, I'm not here to force God upon you, but like, here's the thing. We have Christian men and men who still believe that pornography is just a danger. That it's not really getting you anywhere.
Mm.
It's getting in the way of your goals, your aspirations, and your purpose. So with the guys who are, more on the secular side, I just try to tell them like, if you're looking at this kind of stuff, it's going to be a lot more harder for you to get focused on who you are as a man because you have all these distractions. Pornography is nothing more than just a distraction. It's not really going to get you anywhere. It's nothing more than just cheap intimacy. You keep talking about how you want a wife and this, that, and the other, or a girlfriend, but at the end of the day, you're looking at pornography, watching a man and a woman have sex, and then you're trying to talk about how you want true intimacy with a woman, but like you're not actually talking to anybody or you're not focused on your goals. You're staying in your apartment or your house like 3 to 5 hours a day. So basically, how I talk to the more secular universe is that I've noticed that they want a lot of facts and a lot of knowledge, and it's like I mostly just say, look, listen, like we have the facts, we have the research, but most importantly, like, what are you going to do with it anyway? So it's just very blunt and straight to the point because that's what I've noticed what they like.
Thank you, Caleb. So when you're typically having this kind of conversation with Christian men, right?
Mhm.
What exactly do you now discussing with them? What are the typical, will I say, stereotypes or the typical patterns that you observe? And I mean, what are the patterns that you recognize or that you observe that they typically struggle with when it comes to maintaining a balance between their faith
Mhm.
and the challenges of today's world?
Yeah.
I mean, challenges of today's world there are many blurry lines. There are many things that didn't used to be okay that are now okay. So what are the typical things, I beg your pardon, that you observe that they struggle with and probably makes it difficult for them to find a balance
Mhm.
with their faith and standing for it and even using it to help them navigate this path of addiction?
Just so many things, but one that comes to my mind is like lack of community. And when I mean community, I don't mean just hang out with anybody, like not just hanging out with a bunch of people on the basketball court or whatever the case may be. It's just a lack of like solid biblical Christians around them. And it's like when you don't have those solid biblical Christians who are talking about God's word, like staying away from sin, if it causes you to stumble, pluck your eye out, things like that. If you're not around like that lingo, that terminology, like older men and younger men who just
Yeah.
are talking about their walk with God, like when you don't have that kind of community, it becomes so
Yeah.
much harder and a lot more easier to be more, worldly because the world has crazy standards, like men and women dress very provocatively. Like it's normal to go to a bar and a club and to just get drunk and high through Friday through Sunday. And like when you're not with that biblical based community, you get sucked right into it so quickly. That's what happened to me. I didn't have a really solid biblical community around me, and I was just messing around, doing crazy things, chasing after women, just trying to find some kind of joy. And that's the thing is that men try to find joy within making tons of money, sleeping around with a bunch of women, having sex with a bunch of women because they're torn to trying to get this world domination and this like power. And basically it's become their idol. So obviously God does not want you putting any idols before him. And when you don't understand that, and when you're not reading scripture on a daily basis, it's just that lack of community is just that's the key thing. And when I start telling these guys like, the reason why I want them to be in community, I say, look, the reason why I want you to be in community is not because I want you just to go out here telling these random guys your business. I want you to be with the church community so you can understand how God works, how he works through his people, how there's good, there's bad, there's ugly, but most importantly, how God is using imperfect people to do great and miraculous things in the kingdom. But you're not going to really see that just hanging in the world and looking at pornography and just being by yourself all
I wrote something down here. You said they're trying to find joy.
the time.
Does that indicate that there is an absence of it? There's a hollow that they're trying to fill. So they're using all of these other things to fill up whether sex, pornography, addiction, whatever kind of addiction, or whatever it is that they incline towards. It's the search for joy. Krishnamurti, a particular writer, I think it's a man's search for meaning. So is it a search for meaning for self? And probably because of the inability to be able to pinpoint, and I believe that it is a hollow that God put there himself that only him can feel. And because as human beings we're trying to have control
Yeah.
over situations, the need for control is driving us out of control to extremes where we now begin to get consumed by the things that we're trying to get control over. Because at the end of the day, we still don't have control. It's a hollow that no matter how much we push ourselves,
Yeah.
it's still there. And that's how eventually we get into.
Right.
So people that you have common ground with, that you can, so it's an iron sharpening iron kind of thing. So a company of wise would be wise, a company of fools would be fools, so would be a fool as well. So what is the association that is feeding your mind, your eye gauge, your ear gauge, your experiences, so that by hearing, by associating, you can also become. So that's also another form of what I call it peer mentoring. Peer mentoring in a situation where there was no physical mentor. You talked about the absence of fathers, sometimes, many times, being the reason why you find boys looking for either some level of validation or some level of seeking joy or direction in different places. So that means even men coming together, you can begin as men to peer mentor, mentoring each other by the words that you share, by the affirmations that you agree to, by the standards that you say, this is what we live by. And then you find out that these people begin to respect the creed that binds that association, which is progressive, which is impactful, and which is helpful and helps them to just navigate the curves of life. Yeah. Oh wow. Thank you so much, Caleb. So in your opinion now, looking forward and from here, what do you envision, right, to be the key steps or initiatives within our Christian communities that can foster or facilitate people to become more open to have these kind of dialogues about addiction, dialogues about an addiction or whatever it is. So this is the third podcast that I'm having talking about addiction. So I've had the addiction of first. I mean, there's a gentleman that talked about that his addiction didn't start with drugs. It started with video games as a child. He started with video games, and the purpose of the reason he was, in his words, the reason he was diving into video games was because that was where he was finding strength. So he was being bullied in school, but in video games, he kills a bad guy. So that is where he finds his strength. From video games, that gave him some level of power, and then to drinking, and then to drugs, and all of that. And another guy said similar thing. To first, I used to feel socially awkward, but the first time I took some alcohol, it made me feel like I'm bigger than the world. Well, I'm not feeling awkward anymore. And then he went for 1 cup to 2 cups and kept getting more and more like, oh, alcohol is doing it, puts a bit of heroin on it. So these are conversations that, I mean, manly conversations that we can begin to have. How do we have these conversations man to man? I have a particular passion for men, because just like you said it all when you were speaking earlier, that men are not quite taught the art of communication and the ability to communicate their anxieties, their fears. Emotions are normal. I mean, I was teaching in a class once and talking about how to navigate emotions, and someone said, no, emotions, or you don't show emotion as a man. I said, okay, let's use, how many of you are Christians here? Jesus expressed every emotion. He wept when Lazarus died. He got angry when they were selling in the temple and sent all of them out. That was some level of anger. I mean, he expressed, even when he expressed pain. If you can take this cup away from me, he expressed fear and anxiety, right? So if he can express all of these, why do we limit ourselves? And he was a man as well. So he was a man with like passions. So how come, at what point do we allow society make us feel so invincible that we even begin to break from our feelings of invincibility, right? So how do we begin to get our men to not just speak about this dialogue with each other, but also begin to train next level generational men, next level of generations, I beg your pardon, of men to own their truth, recognize the shame that may come with it, and own it with their full chest, and then be able to confront it. Because what you cannot confront, what you cannot overcome, if you can't overcome the shame, you can't confront it. To be able to say this far, no further. To say, okay, this shame is not having me anymore. I'm dealing with it. I'm getting out of it. How do we get to that point where our men can begin to understand the importance of opening up and having healthy dialogues about addiction, the path to recovery, and even integrating faith into it?
So basically, I just tell men, like, look, listen, all because we're Christians, we have flesh and we have spirit. In scripture it says in Ephesians, for we not wage war against flesh and blood, but against dark forces and principalities. So the enemy is always on the prowl. There's another scripture that says to be sober-minded and vigilant. because the enemy is always on the prowl. So it's like with the enemy always being on the prowl and us as men, having this like, I guess like country cowboy western like stoicness as men from like, which has basically just been programming. It's been programming and conditioning to be like that, to just never show any feelings, any emotion, because and usually young guys like myself, we gravitate towards that because again, with that lack of fatherhood, those lack of male mentors who are just being vulnerable, transparent, and just honest and just being real, like, hey, like these are the things I had to overcome, these are the things I went through as a kid. Like, it's not that there was anything wrong with me. I didn't have any guidance. So basically, I think one of the main things is just having having these things at churches, having these things at places where you have these open and honest conversations that, Christians need healing on a daily basis. Christians are not always going to be perfect. It even says in the book of Romans, for we all fall short of the glory of God. But however, I always tell people all the time, especially men, we don't have to keep falling to the same thing over and over and over again because
Over again, yeah.
we have that community. We have that community of people, but letting guys know that like you'll get hurt as a Christian. Like I can't promise you that you won't get hurt as a Christian. I've been hurt as a Christian. I've been hurt when I wasn't a Christian. Like being hurt, it is what it is, but like you have to tell people what hurt you, what happened.
Yeah.
So you can actually heal from that.
Yeah.
Fester it up, and this is great film I watched. It was called The Count of Monte Cristo, and it was this character named Edmund.
The Count of Monte. Yeah. Okay.
This is like I think I was the 2002 version. It wasn't the one from the 70s, but I watched it when I was a kid.
I've heard.
Yeah, and it was
Okay.
Edmond Dantes, and he was sentenced by his buddy Fernand and a couple other people who were basically just his fake friends. They sent him to this prison, to the Shadow Deep, and he was there for like, I think 20, 30 years or so, something along those lines. And he just developed a lot of bitterness, a lot of anger. And then he met a guy that was a priest. And this priest began to just be vulnerable. And he wasn't mean to him. He didn't yell at him or scream at him. He taught him how to read, how to write, how to fight. But most importantly, he taught him how to heal. And this wasn't a Christian film, but like the reason why I bring this film up is because I see a lot of Christian men who deal with revenge. So to make a long story short, is like Edmond Dantes, he went out and he killed all these people. He went out and killed all these people, and after he killed Fernand for really betraying him and taking his woman Mercedes, he felt nothing more than apathy. And it's like, that apathy that Solomon had when he slept around with all those women. It's very similar. They both go hand in hand. Because, when
Yeah.
men try to keep on trying to get this power and world domination and trying to control everything, they don't even realize that you're more out of control when you're trying to control everything else around you. So Edmund Dantes had to have like that, I guess, come into Jesus moment where he realizes that the priest was right all along. The priest was just telling him, just take the treasure, move on. You're a free man. Yes, you were falsely accused, but like just move on with your life and just move forward. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to enact revenge. And when you just, you don't take that time to realize that vengeful spirit that's mustering up inside of you, and you don't heal from that, bad things end up happening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Caleb. Thank
Yeah,
you. It's
yeah.
been quite insightful talking to you. Really insightful. And I hope our viewers are going to be really inspired by this and begin to have that self-reflection as well and start either identifying or building their communities where you're going to begin to build strength, community of trust, right? And more like accountability partners as well. What would be your final counsel and word to anyone that is watching?
Yeah, I would say just keep moving forward and don't move backwards, It's also this book that I just finished up yesterday. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's a great business
Oh,
book.
wow. That
Yeah.
book is a lifetime
Mhm.
resource, yes.
And, with addiction, I do believe that, you're going to have to move your cheese because you're sitting in the right, you're sitting in basically one station and you're not going anywhere and you're afraid, you're scared, you're kind of like the character Ham and you're afraid of change. But at the end of the day, if you keep letting yourself be afraid of change, you won't really experience anything. So you got to move your cheese.
Yeah, you move your cheese or someone gets to move the cheese for you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Caleb. It's been quite insightful speaking with you. And I really pray that you're able to transform more lives and reach out to more people and just help them to overcome this, the shame of addiction, of the addiction itself, and the addiction as well. So there are two things: first, to overcome the shame, and then to overcome the addiction. Many times the shame, it doesn't even let us now focus on this recovery journey to getting out of it, but then deal with the addiction and deal with the shame and then deal with the addiction. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, for sharing your story, and hey, keep impacting lives one after the other. Thank you to everyone that has joined us or that is going to watch this wherever it is that you are. Recognize that you are not what hurt you. You are not what you lost. You are not what programmed you, whether positively or negatively, but you are who God has made you to be. And it's important, like Caleb has said, find the right community of people that reinforce who you were originally created to be in God, the genius. I believe, and I'll always say, that we are all geniuses. Albert Einstein got it right. There's a genius in every human being, and that genius is a reflection of God in you. And it's important that we begin to live from that place of Godness and impact our world one genius at a time. So stay genius, stay amazing, and remember that no matter what comes or goes, no matter what gives in or doesn't, no matter where you have lost, no matter how many times you have fallen, stand up again, keep on moving, and never give up until you win. And even if you don't win, ensure by all means that you finish strong. And if you still have the strength to move further, do it all over again. You have an amazing rest of the day. I am StephREDD. Cheers.